Hello and welcome. Hello, Kate B. You are very welcome today. So, wrapping up my little impromptu season of Thomas Carnacki stories by Hope Hodgson. I am going to be doing The Hog, which is probably, certainly of the ones I've read, this is the weirdest thing that I've encountered by Hope Hodgson. Hello, Molly. Lovely to see you. This is really his biggest venture into proper cosmic horror. To the extent that the beastie from the title appears in one of the supplemental bestiaries to the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. So that's fun. And it very much merits its place in the game. It's horrible. So, Kate B. Ruthie's vet visit went well, got her shots, but you've been too generous with her treats. Oh, bless. Oh, well, I hope she can get herself sorted. Or you can get her sorted. So, there are content warnings today. We have content warnings for unreality, insomnia, and sleep deprivation. Oh, am I back, Molly? Oh, it was your laptop. Okay. I've got a new sound baffle behind my microphone, and I suddenly thought, oh my god, have I pulled the cable out or something? So that's a relief. So yes, we've got content warnings for unreality, sleep deprivation, insomnia, possession, and the perils of working from home. That's understandable, Molly. I'm glad I sorted it. I'm glad we established it now rather than partway through when I was going to be panicking. Use this as practice for audiobook auditions. Whee! Oh god, what am I doing? So fingers crossed that they will work out. Would have been on slightly earlier, except I had no voice. Don't know why. Perils of working from home, your dog's sitting and the dog feels like the need to tell you about every single person using the public walkways. I can imagine. I can only imagine. Given next door's dog every time a delivery person wanders past. Yeah. Hasn't got used to, they've lived here 2 years now. They haven't got used to me walking past. Every now and then I feel the need to just say, look, I live here. Stop it. They're a Pomeranian. I think they come with a built-in amplifier. Small dog, huge bark. Very disconcerting. Okay. The Hog by Hope Hodgson. We'd finished dinner, and Carnacki had drawn his big chair up to the fire and started his pipe. Jessup, Arkwright, Taylor and I had each taken up our favourite positions and waited for Carnacki to begin. What I'm going to tell you about happened in the next room, he said, after drawing at his pipe for a while. It has been a terrible experience. Dr. Whitten first brought the case to my notice. We'd been chatting over a pipe at the club one night about an article in the Lancet. and Whitton mentioned having just such a similar case in a man called Baines. I was interested at once. It was one of those cases of a gap or flaw in a man's protection barrier, I call it. A failure to be what I might term efficiently insulated spiritually from the outer monstrosities. From what I knew of Whitton, I knew he'd be no use. You all know Whitton, a decent sort, hard-headed, practical, stand no nonsense sort of man, all right at his own job when that job's a fractured leg or a broken collarbone, but he'd never made anything of the Baines case. For a space, Carnacki puffed meditatively at his pipe, and we waited for him to go on with his tale. I told Whitton to send Baines to me, he resumed, and the following Saturday he came up. Little sensitive man. I liked him as soon as I set eyes on him. After a bit, I got him to explain what was troubling him, and questioned him about what Dr. Whitton had called his dreams. "Oh, they're more than dreams," he said. "They're so real that they're actual experiences to me. They're simply horrible, and yet there's nothing very definite in them to tell you about. They genuinely come as I'm going off to sleep. I'm hardly over it before suddenly I seem to have gone down some deep, vague place with some inexplicable and frightful horror all about me. I can never understand what it is. I never see anything. Only I always get a sudden knowledge, like a warning that I've gone down into some terrible place, a sort of hell place I might call it, where I've no business ever to have wandered, and the warning's always insistent, even imperative, that I must get out. Get out, or some enormous horror will come at me." "Can't you pull yourself back?" I asked him. "Can't you wake up?" "No," he told me. "That's just what I can't do, try as I will. I can't stop going along this labyrinth of hell, as I call it to myself, towards some dreadful unknown horror. The warning's repeated ever so strongly, almost as if the live me of my waking moments was awake and aware. Something seems to warn me to wake up, that whatever I do, I must wake. Wake, and then my consciousness comes suddenly alive, and I know that my body's there in the bed, but my essence or spirit is still down there in that hell, wherever it is, in a danger that's both unknown and inexpressible, but so overwhelming my whole spirit seems sick with terror. I keep saying to myself all the time that I must wake up," he continued, "but it's as if my spirit is still down there, and if my consciousness knows that some tremendous invisible power is fighting against me. I know that if I do not wake up, then I shall never wake up again, but go down deeper and deeper into some stupendous horror of soul destruction. So then I fight. My body lies in the bed there and pulls, and the power down there in that labyrinth exerts itself too, so that a feeling of despair greater than anything I've ever known on this earth comes on me. I know that if I give way and cease to fight and do not wake, then I shall pass out to that monstrous horror which seems to be silently calling my soul to destruction. And then I make a final stupendous effort," he continued, "and my brain seems to fill my body like the ghost of my soul. I can even open my eyes and see with my brain, or consciousness, out of my own eyes. I can see the bedclothes, and I know just how I'm lying in the bed. Yet the real me's down in that hell in terrible danger. Can you get me?" he asked. "Perfectly," I replied. "You liar." Okay, so yes, straight in with the cosmic horror there. Poor guy. "Well, you know," he went on, "I fight and fight. Down there in that great pit, my very soul seems to shrink back from the call of some brooding horror that impels it silently a little further, always a little further, round a visible corner, which if I once pass, I know I shall never return again to this world. Desperately I fight, brain and consciousness fighting together to help it. The agony is so great I could scream were it not that I'm rigid and frozen in the bed with fear. And then, just when my strength seems almost gone, soul and body win, and blend slowly, and I lie there, worn out with this terrible, extraordinary fight. I still have a sense of the dreadful horror all about me, as if out of that horrible place some brooding monstrosity had followed me up, and hangs still and silent and invisible over me, threatening me there in my bed. Do I make it clear to you? He asked. It's like some monstrous presence. Yes, I said, I follow you. The man's forehead was actually covered with sweat, so keenly did he live again through the horrors he had experienced. After a while, he continued. Now comes the most curious part of the dream, or whatever it is, he said. There's always a sound I hear as I lie there exhausted in the bed. It comes while the bedroom's still full of the sort of atmosphere of monstrosity that seems to come up with me when I get out of that place. I hear the sound coming out of that awful, enormous depth, and it's always the noise of pigs. Pigs grunting, you know? It's simply just dreadful. The dream's always the same. Sometimes I've had it every single night for a week until I fight not to go to sleep, but of course I have to sleep sometimes. I think that's how a person might go mad, don't you? He finished. I nodded and looked at his sensitive face. Poor beggar, he'd been through it and no mistake. Tell me more, I said. The grunting, what does it sound like exactly? Well, it's just like pigs grunting, he told me again, only much more awful. There are grunts and squeals and pig howls, like when you hear their foods being brought to them at a pig farm. You know, those large pig farms where they keep hundreds of pigs. All the grunts, squeals and howls blend into one brutal chaos of sound, only it isn't chaos. It all blends in a queer, horrible way. I've heard it. A sort of swinish, clamouring melody that grunts and roars and shrieks in chunks of grunting sounds, all tied together with squealings and shot through it with pig howls. I've sometimes thought there was a definite beat in it, for every now and again there comes a gargantuan grunt, breaking through the million pig-voiced roaring, a stupendous grunt that comes in with a beat. Can you understand me? It seems to shake everything. It's like a spiritual earthquake. The howling, squealing, grunting, rolling clamour of swinish noise coming up out of that place, and then the monstrous grunt rising up through all of it. An ever-recurring beat out of the depth. The voice of the swine mother of monstrosity beating up from below through that chorus of mad swine hunger is no use. I can't explain it. No one ever could. It's just terrible, and I'm afraid you're saying to yourself that I'm in a bad way, that I want to change, or a tonic, that I must bark up, or I'll land myself in a madhouse. Only you could understand. Dr. Whitten seems to half understand, I thought, but I know he's only sent me to you as a sort of last hope. He thinks I'm booked for the asylum, I could tell. Feral gremlin noises from the back. Yep. Nonsense, I said. Don't talk such rubbish. You're as sane as I am. Okay, I think... That's not a high bar, Thomas. Mr. Carnacki, sir, I have seen some of the things you have done, and considered, and said. Can we examine how sane you actually are? Please. Your ability to think clearly what you want to tell me and then to transmit it to me so well that you compel my mental retina to see something of what you've seen stands sponsor for your mental balance. I'm going to investigate your case, and if it's what I suspect, one of those rare instances of a flaw or a gap in your protective barrier, what I might call your spiritual installation from the outer monstrosities, I've no doubt we can end the trouble. But we've got to go properly into the matter first, and there will certainly be danger in doing so. I'll risk it, replied Baines. I can't go on like this any longer. Very well, I told him. Go out now and come back at 5 o'clock. I shall be ready for you then. And don't worry about your sanity. You're all right, and we'll soon make things safe for you again. Just keep cheerful and don't brood about it. I put in the whole afternoon preparing my experimenting room across the landing there for his case. When he returned at 5 o'clock, I was ready for him and took him straight into the room. It gets dark now, about 6:30, as you know, and I had just nice time before it grew dusk to finish my arrangements. I prefer always to be ready before the dark comes. Baines touched my elbow as we walked into the room. "There's something I ought to have told you," he said, looking rather sheepish. "I've somehow felt a bit ashamed of it." "Out with it," I replied. He hesitated a moment, then it came out with a jerk. "I told you about the grunting of the pigs," he said. "Well, I grunt too. I know it's horrible. When I lie there in bed and hear those sounds after I've come up, I just grunt back as if in reply. I can't stop myself. I just do it. Something makes me. I never told Dr. Whitton that. I couldn't. Oh, I'm sure now you think me mad," he concluded. "Doesn't it, though, Hiram? Yes, I grunt too. It's an effective phrase." He looked into my face, anxious and queerly ashamed. "It's only the natural sequence of the abnormal events, and I'm glad you told me," I said, slapping him on the back. "It follows logically on from what you've already told me. I've had 2 cases like that, in some ways resembling yours." "What happened?" he asked me. "Did they get better?" "One of them's alive and well today, Mr. Baines," I replied. "The other man lost his nerve, and fortunately for concerned, he's dead." I shut the door and locked it as I spoke, and Baines stared round, rather alarmed, I fancy, at my apparatus. Maybe he was alarmed at the fact that you just told him you've got a 50% success rate versus death, and you've just locked him in a room. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Will it be a dangerous experiment?" "Dangerous enough," I asked, "if you follow my instructions absolutely in everything. We both run the risk of never leaving this room alive. Have I your word that I can depend on you to obey me whatever happens?" He stared around the room and then back at me. "Yes," he replied. And you know, I felt he would prove the right kind of stuff when the moment came. "Oh, good to hear, KB. You're getting paid to dog sit in vegetables. That works." Okay. Upcoming, we have what, if we see in reality or in an adaptation or something, would be a set of very silly outfits. However, we're working with the best technology that turn of the century Britain had to provide. So, bear that in mind and try not to giggle. Okay? I began now to get things finally in train for the night's work. I told Baines to take off his coat and his boots. Then I dressed him entirely from head to foot in a single thick rubber combination overall, with rubber gloves and a helmet with ear flaps of the same material attached. I dressed myself in a similar suit. Then I began on the next stage of the night's preparations. First, I must tell you that the room measures 39 feet by 39 feet, and has a plain board floor over which is fitted a heavy half-inch rubber covering. I'd cleared the floor entirely, all but the exact centre where I had placed the glass-legged, upholstered table, a pile of vacuum tubes and batteries, and 3 pieces of special apparatus which my equipment required. "Now, Baines," I called, "come and stand over here by this table. Don't move about. I've got to erect a protective barrier around us, and on no account must either of us cross over it by even so much as a hand or foot once it's built." We went over to the middle of the room, and he stood by the glass-legged table while I began to fit the vacuum tubing together around us. I intended to use the new spectrum defense, which I've been perfecting lately. This, I must tell you, consists of 7 glass vacuum circles, with the red on the outside and the colour circles lying inside it, in the order of orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The room was still fairly light, but a slight quantity of dusk seemed to already be in the atmosphere, and I worked quickly. Suddenly, as I fitted the glass tubes together, I was aware of some vague sense of nerve strain, and glancing round at Baines, who was standing there by the table, I noticed him staring fixedly before him. He looked absolutely drowned in uncomfortable memories. "Oh, for goodness sake, stop thinking of those horrors," I called out to him. "I shall want you to think hard enough about them later, but in this specially constructed room it's better not to dwell on things of that kind till the barriers are up. Keep your mind on anything normal or superficial. The theatre will do. Think about that last piece you saw at the Gaiety. I'll talk to you in a minute." You're imagining the Devo music video for some reason where they wear yellow slickers and you think it's flower pots on their heads. Yeah, I can see that. I'm thinking of these in terms of sort of diving suits, is the best way I can come up with it. It's got to be hot as hell, though. 20 minutes later, the barrier was completed all around us, and I connected up the batteries. The room by this time was greying with the coming dust, and the 7 differently coloured circles shone out with extraordinary effect, sending out a cold glare. "By Jove," cried Baines, "that's very wonderful, very wonderful." My other apparatus, which I now began to arrange, consisted of a specially made camera, a modified form of phonograph with earpieces instead of a horn, and a glass disc composed of many fathoms of glass vacuum tubes arranged in a special way. It had 2 wires leading to an electrode constructed to fit around the head. By the time I had looked over and fixed up these 3 things, night had practically come, and the darkened room shone most strangely in the curious upward glare of the 7 vacuum tubes. "Now, Baines," I said, "I want you to lie on this table. Now, put your hands down by your sides and lie quiet and think. You've just got 2 things to do," I told him. "One is to lie there and concentrate your thoughts on the details of the dream you're always having, and the other is not to move off this table whatever you see or hear or whatever happens unless I tell you. You understand, don't you?" "Yes," he answered. "I think you may rely on me not to make a fool of myself. I feel curiously safe with you somehow." "I'm glad of that," I replied, "but I don't want you to minimize the danger too much. There may be horrible danger. Now, let me fix this band on your head," I added as I adjusted the electrode. I gave him a few more instructions, telling him to concentrate his thoughts particularly upon the noises he heard, just as he was waking, and I warned him again not to let himself fall asleep. Hiram, you could indeed see it that way if you wished. I strongly suspect Carnacki doesn't at all with anyone. "Don't talk," I said, "and don't take any notice of me. If you find I disturb your concentration, keep your eyes closed." He lay back, and I walked over to the glass disc, arranging the camera in front of it on its stand in such a way that the lens was opposite the centre of the disc. I had scarcely done this when a ripple of greenish light ran across the vacuum tubes of the disc. This vanished, and for maybe a minute there was complete darkness. Then the green light rippled once more across it, rippled and swung round, and began to dance in varying shades from a deep heavy green to a rank ugly shade. Back and forward, back and forward. Every half-second or so there shot across the varying greens a flicker of yellow, an ugly, heavy, repulsive yellow, and then abruptly there came sweeping across the disc a great beat of muddy red. This died as quickly as it came, and gave place to the changing greens shot through by the unpleasant and ugly yellow hues. About every 7th second the disc was submerged, and the other colours momentarily blotted out by the great beat of heavy, muddy red which swept over everything. "He's concentrating on those sounds," I said to myself, and I felt queerly excited as I hurried on with my operations. I threw a word over my shoulder to Baines. "Don't get scared, whatever happens," I said. "You're all right." I proceeded now to operate my camera. It had a long roll of specially prepared paper ribbon in place of a film or plates. By turning the handle, the roll passed through the machine, exposing the ribbon. It took about 5 minutes to finish the roll, and during all that time the green lights predominated, but the dull, heavy beat of muddy red never ceased to flow across the vacuum tubes of the disc at every 7th second. It was like a recurrent beat in some unheard and somehow displeasing melody. Lifting the exposed spool of paper ribbon out of the camera, I laid it horizontally in the 2 rests I'd arranged for it on my modified gramophone. Where the paper had been acted upon by the varying coloured lights which had appeared on the disc, the prepared surface had risen in curious, irregular little waves. I unrolled about a foot of the ribbon and attached the loose end to an empty spool roller on the opposite side of the machine, which I geared to the driving clockwork mechanism of the gramophone. Then I took the diaphragm and lowered it gently into place above the ribbon. Instead of the usual needle, the diaphragm was fitted with a beautifully made metal filament brush, about an inch broad, which just covered the whole breadth of the ribbon. This fine and fragile brush rested lightly on the prepared surface of the paper, and when I started the machine, the ribbon began to pass under the brush, and as it passed, the delicate metal filament bristles followed every minute inequality of those tiny, irregular, wave-like excrescences on the surface. You see, this sort of thing is a very modern sort of look. You could definitely do elements of it on television fairly easily. And then you have the thick rubber coveralls. I put the earpieces to my ears, and instantly I knew I had succeeded in actually recording what Baines had heard in his sleep. In fact, I was even then hearing mentally by means of his effort of memory. I was listening to what appeared to be the faint, far-off squealing and grunting of countless swine. It was extraordinary, and at the same time exquisitely horrible and vile. It frightened me, with a sense of my having come suddenly and unexpectedly too near to something foul and most abominably dangerous. So strong and imperative was this feeling that I twitched the earpieces out of my ears and sat a while staring round the room, trying to steady my sensations back to normality. The room looked strange and vague in the dull glow of light from the circles, and I had a feeling that a taint of monstrosity was all about me in the air. I remembered what Baines had told me of the feeling he'd always had after coming up out of that place, as if some horrible atmosphere had followed him up and filled his bedroom. I understood him perfectly now, so much so that I had mentally used almost his exact phrase in explaining to myself what I felt. Turning round to speak to him, I saw there was something curious about the centre of the defence. Now, before I tell you fellows any more, I must explain that there are certain, what I call focusing qualities about this new defence I've been trying. The Sixth manuscript puts it something like this. Avoid diversities of colour, nor stand ye within the barrier of the colour lights, for in colour hath Satan a delight. Nor can he abide in the deep if ye adventure against him armed with red purple, so be warned. Never forget that in blue, which is God's colour in the heavens, ye have safety. Explain to me again what you're doing, Carnacki, because you're standing in a circle of coloured lights. Not judging, but... You see, from that statement in the Sigson manuscript, I got my first notion for this new defence of mine. I've aimed to make it a defence and yet have focusing or drawing qualities such as the Sigson hints at. I've experimented enormously, and I've proved that reds and purples, the 2 extreme colours of the spectrum, are fairly dangerous. So much so that I suspect they actually draw or focus the outside forces. Any action or meddling on the part of the experimentalist is tremendously enhanced in its effect if the action is taken within barriers composed of these colours, in certain proportions and tints. In the same way, blue is distinctly a general defence. Yellow appears to be neutral, and green a wonderful protection within limits. Orange, as far as I can tell, is slightly attractive, and indigo is dangerous by itself in a limited way, but in certain combinations with the other colours it becomes a very powerful defence. I've not discovered a tenth of the possibilities of these circles of mine. It's a kind of colour organ upon which I seem to play a tune of colour combinations that can be either safe or infernal in its effects. You know, I have a keyboard with a separate switch to each of the colour circles. Well, you fellows will understand now what I felt when I saw the curious appearance of the floor in the middle of the defence. It looked exactly as if a circular shadow lay not just on the floor, but a few inches above it. The shadow seemed to deepen and blacken at the centre, even while I watched it. It appeared to be spreading from the centre outwardly, and all the time it grew darker. I was watchful, and not a little puzzled, for the combination of lights that I had switched on approximated a moderately safe general defence. Understand, I had no intention of making a focus until I learnt more. In fact, I meant that first investigation not to go beyond a tentative inquiry into the kind of thing I had got to deal with. I knelt down quickly and felt the floor with the palm of my hand, but it was quite normal to the feel, and that reassured me that there was no Saiti mischief aboard. For that form is a danger which can involve and make use of the very material of the defence itself. It can materialise out of everything except fire. As I knelt there, I realised all at once that the legs of the table on which Baines lay were partly hidden in the ever-blackening shadow, and my hands seemed to grow vague as I felt at the floor. I got up and stood away a couple of feet so as to see the phenomenon from a little distance. It struck me then that there was something about the table itself. It seemed unaccountably lower. It's the shadow hiding the legs, I thought to myself. This promises to be interesting, but I'd better not let things go too far. I called out to Baines to stop thinking so hard. "Stop concentrating for a bit," I said, but he never answered, and it occurred to me suddenly that the table appeared to be still lower. "Baines," I shouted, "stop thinking a moment." Then in a flash I realised it. "Wake up, man! Wake up!" I cried. He'd fallen over asleep, the very last thing he should have done, for it increased the danger twofold. No wonder I'd been getting such good results. The poor beggar was worn out with his sleepless nights. He neither moved nor spoke as I strode across to him. "Wake up!" I shouted again, shaking him by the shoulder. My voice echoed uncomfortably around the big empty room, and Baines lay like a dead man. As I shook him again, I noticed that I appeared to be standing up to my knees in the circular shadow. It looked like the mouth of a pit. My legs from the knees downwards were vague. The floor under my feet felt solid and firm when I stamped on it, but all the same I had a feeling that things were going a bit too far, so striding across to the switchboard, I switched on the full defence. Stepping back quickly to the table, I had a horrible and sickening shock. The table had sunk quite unmistakably. Its top was within a couple of feet of the floor, and the legs had that foreshortened appearance that one sees when a stick is thrust into water. It looked vague and shadowy in the peculiar circle of dark shadows which had such an extraordinary resemblance to the black mouth of a pit. I could see only the top of the table plainly, with Baines lying motionless on it, and the whole thing was going down as I stared into that black circle. There was not a moment to lose, and like a flash I caught Baines around his neck and body and lifted him clean up into my arms off the table. And as I lifted him, he grunted like a great swine in my ear. That sound sent a thrill of horrible funk through me. It was just as though I held a hog in my arms instead of a human. I nearly dropped him. Then I held his face to the light and stared down at him. His eyes were half open, and he was looking at me, apparently, as if he saw me perfectly. And then he grunted again. I could feel his small body quiver with the sound. I called out to him, "Baines," I said, "can you hear me?" His eyes still gazed at me, and then, as we looked at each other, he grunted like a swine again. I let go one hand and hit him across the cheek, a stinging slap. "Wake up, Baines," I shouted. "Wake up!" But I might have hit a corpse. He just stared up at me, and suddenly I bent lower and looked into his eyes more closely. I never saw such a fixed, intelligent, mad horror as I saw there. It knocked out all my sudden disgust. Can you understand? I glanced round quickly at the table. It stood there at its normal height, and indeed it was in every way normal. The curious shadow that had somehow suggested to me the black mouth of the pit had vanished. I felt relieved, for it seemed to me that I'd entirely broken up any possibility of a partial focus by means of the full defence which I'd switched on. I laid Baines on the floor, and stood up to look around and consider what was best to do. I dared not step outside the SERP barriers until any dangerous tensions there might be in the room had been dissipated. Nor was it wise, even inside the full defence, to have him sleeping the kind of sleep he was in, not without certain preparations having been made first, which I had not made. I can tell you I felt beastly anxious. I glanced down at Baines and had a sudden fresh shock, for the peculiar circular shadow was forming all round him again, where he lay on the floor. His hands and face showed curiously vague and distorted, as though they might have looked through a few inches of faintly stained water. But his eyes were somehow clear to see. They were staring up mute and terrible at me through that horrible darkening shadow. I stopped, and with one quick lift tore him up off the floor into my arms, and for the third time he grunted like a swine there in my arms. It was damnable. I stood up in the barrier, holding Baines, and looked across the room again, then back at the floor. The shadow was still thick around my feet, and I stepped quickly across to the other side of the table. I stared at the shadow and saw that it had vanished. Then I glanced down at my feet and had another shock. The shadow was showing faintly again, all round where I stood. I moved a pace, watched the shadow become invisible, and then once more, like a slow stain, it began to grow about my feet. I moved again a pace and stared round the room, meditating a break for the door, and then in that instant I saw that that would almost certainly be impossible. For there was something indefinite in the atmosphere of the room, something that moved, circling slowly about the barrier. And that's where we're leaving it for this week. I hope you're enjoying it. Couple of fairly obvious mistakes that poor Carnacki has made. Expecting someone who had been suffering from insomnia not to fall asleep when lying down with his eyes closed on a comfortable surface. So I will be carrying this on next Monday. I hope you will join me then. And I hope you enjoyed the headlong dive into some cosmic horror. It's fun. So I will wrap up this evening, and I'm aiming to be back on in about half an hour with some more Sinking City 2. Oh, thank you. I hope it sounded okay. But thank you, Kate B. I appreciate the compliment. Assuming you meant any of my reading, not just the story. Monier, you are very welcome. This is a weird one, and it's quite long. I think it's going to be 2 solid sessions. It might run to a third. We shall see. But it's certainly incredibly dangerous for poor old Thomas Carnacki, and yeah, you kind of feel for poor little Baines. So yes, we shall leave Carnacki pacing back and forth with a guy in his arms. As a shadow follows them around inside the barrier, and something is swirling outside. Kate B, the whole thing's the highlight of your Mondays, but this story in particular is something, well, this is easily the most out there of all the Hope Hodgson stories I've read. Alia, any audiobook narration hiring person company would be a fool not to hire you. Thank you. Well, cross your fingers. You never know. I have some hopes. Hello, Echoes. Sorry about that. It is on my YouTube, where I am Druttercup, if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel. And that's probably an easier way to get at this than through Twitch. But I think basically what you missed was the patient in this situation describing the dreams that Carnacki is supposedly going to cure him of. Supposedly. Varlander, whoops. Hey, Alia, I am completely down for that. We consider it a privilege. Right, so I am going to check out the standard thing for those catching this on VOD. If you would like to support the channel, you can do so on ko-fi.com/Druttercup. Best option, really. If you're not following my channel on Twitch or subscribed on YouTube, that would be a lovely gesture on your part, and you can click the bell in both cases to get alerts when I go live. I stream on both channels, both platforms these days. And in about half an hour or so, I will, about half hour, I will be back on with The Sinking City 2, which I was going to say is a very different feel to book club. To be honest, it's not that different to this week's book club. So I hope to see some of you then. Otherwise, I will be back next Monday. So thank you very much, and I shall catch you around. See you in a bit.